Two card games, both alike in dignity. In fair local game store where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where simple words make civil cards unclean. From forth the fatal flaws of these two foes, a dearth of keyboards clatter full of strife. And neither side's awareness seems to show that there's much better uses for their life. When designing a game, one of the things that often goes overlooked is information clarity. A programmer who is well versed with the way games communicate and track data will easily find what they need, but someone who has just picked up the game without any prior information isn't as fortunate. This is why a lot of esports tend to falter when they attempt to reach a larger mainstream audience. Sure, a game of League of Legends or StarCraft can be an intense, heart-pounding match between two titans of the game, but it's much harder for the layman to understand the nuances of the Terran versus Protoss matchup if they don't even know what a Vespene gas is. When designing around this problem, one of the most common and effective methods to clarify information is the use of keywords. For example, when Path of Exile uses the word recently, it always refers to the past 4 seconds. The use of keywords serves two purposes. First, it creates a common mechanical reference point that allows players to mentally shortcut part of their understanding. Second, it reduces the literal word count of the skill or effect in question, allowing for players of all skill levels to more quickly read and understand the effects on the cards. There are trade-offs, however, especially if you aren't careful. The word nearby appears on a large variety of items in Path of Exile, but it hasn't been standardized like recently has. As a result, depending on the context, the word nearby can refer to anywhere from a mere 15 game units to a whopping 75 or even up to 120 units. While the use of the word nearby might seem like a useful keyword at first, this is an example of how improper use of keywording can actually make information less clear rather than more. In order to examine the ways keywords change the design of your game, I'd like to examine two games. Magic the Gathering, of course, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic is a game that should need no introduction, especially if you watch this channel regularly. If you played a good trading card game in the last 3 decades, Magic is to blame for it. It serves as a gold standard for card game design even to this day. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of the first competitors that really gave Magic a run for its money, backed by multiple iconic TV shows and hundreds of manga volumes. Despite Yu-Gi-Oh! Being conceived purely as a game that needed to look like Magic in the manga without much regard to its rules, the game plays very competently, and can be a lot of fun when you aren't getting shit-stomped by Tearlament or OTK'd by fucking Numeron again. However, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very hard to get into, and one of the primary reasons is information clarity. Look at this card. This card has 2 effects. First, a somewhat common clause allowing you to circumvent the card's normal costs if your board state is set up in a certain way. Second, if this card is in your graveyard, it can banish itself to tutor for a card in its archetype and put it directly on the field, locking you into worm creatures on resolution. Neither of these effects are very complicated in the grand scheme of Yu-Gi-Oh!, and seasoned players probably won't bat an eye when they read the 72 words of effect text, but this causes a lot of fatigue for a new player. Contrast that with Magic. A card like Adult Gold Dragon actually has quite a few effects, but because of Magic's due diligence with keywording, it only actually has 3 words of effect text. Contrast the readability of this printed card to a version I made using a custom card generator that expands on each of the keywords like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card would. Some players would argue for the virtues of the clarity of the more elaborate card text, as a player can glean a complete understanding of the card without referring to any external sources or friendly assistance. However, that high level of information clarity comes at the cost of making the card more difficult to understand at a glance. The keywords on Adult Gold Dragon are evergreen, meaning they will be understood by most regular Magic players, even just the intermediate level ones, and keywords like Flying and Trample can be figured out almost intuitively, with their language being a very effective way to deduce their mechanical function. The most obvious trouble with keywords is that they come at the cost of complete readability. Within keywords like Trample, and especially First Strike and Double Strike, there's a lot of unmentioned nuance with the ways the mechanics interact, and it leads to weird magic shit that you just have to get used to. For instance, you can sacrifice a creature that has been declared as a blocker, and it still blocks the damage unless the creature it is blocking has Trample. A creature with just Double Strike can be fully blocked by a single creature even if the second strike would have been able to hit the player, but a creature with both Trample and Double Strike can hit the player regardless. Really, it's just a lot of weird Trample interactions, but you get the idea. I might have to read hundreds of words on a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card, but it's unlikely that that card's function will remain ambiguous. Magic also has some trouble with set-specific keywords. Sure, keywords like the strike keywords, trample, scry, haste, and such are easy to understand and very common, But when you hit the EDH tables, you suddenly have to understand Madness, Affinity, Imprint, Incubate, Emerge, Casualty, Blitz, Dash, Landfall, Rampage, Threshold, and any number of other mechanics that may have only been included in 1 or 2 sets in the early 2010s. Each mechanic has its own nuances and interactions. For example, if you use a card with Mutate to mutate on top of a legendary creature, that creature is now treated as non-legendary, and no longer follows the rule forcing you to only have 1 on the board. A card with Madness is technically discarded into Exile, wherein the player is given an option to cast it, meaning it can trigger abilities that care about cards being cast from exile. All of this complexity is completely hidden by a layer of abstraction that's been introduced by the keyword. I personally prefer the veiled complexity of Magic's cards to the verbosity of Yu-Gi-Oh's, but it's important to understand that, like any game design decision, understanding the intention of the design, the way the game communicates, and the ways the players play the game is important. It's not a good or a bad thing to have keywords necessarily. A well-designed evergreen keyword can go a long way to helping players understand your game quickly. But players can get overwhelmed if they keep having to reference the comprehensive rulebook to understand the funny pictures on the cardboard. This problem compounds upon itself if keywords are ambiguous, and in extreme cases can prevent the player from making fully informed decisions. When designing a good keyword, you need to make sure that the behavior is consistent, common, and easy to understand. If you've played the games I've been talking about today and you have some insight into the way keywords, or more broadly, the way information is generally presented, have affected your ability to understand mechanics, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you'd like to see me cover a specific topic, or have a game you'd really love to see someone try for the first time, I'd be happy to hear about it. Regardless, I hope that this video gave you some insight. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope you've enjoyed your time.